How are you doing today? Hope you're having a really fabulous day. I would love it if you would take a moment and introduce yourselves. If you would, and I'm just going to double check here. Yes, okay. If you take a moment and introduce yourself, regardless of which platform you're with me on, we've got Instagram, Facebook, and the live webinar happening right now. I would love to know where you're from. And I would love to know if you are new to iridology or if you are experienced. All right, that just helps me to tailor make this on the fly and to make sure I'm giving you information that is the very best for you. It's good to have you with me today. And today we are talking about eye anatomy. Now, this is a really important thing for us to know as iridologists. You know, when we think about iridology, we think about looking at the surface of the eye, and we don't stop to think about sometimes, especially if we're new, what that surface is made of and how what we're looking at, what it's really made up of, and how that could affect what we're seeing. So it's important to be paying attention to this kind of really basic fundamental. And this is the kind of thing you're not going to see in a lot of webinars, okay? And so just to be aware. Now, Valerie, who's with us on Facebook, says she's new. Fabulous, welcome. I'm glad you're with us, Valerie. Okay, now, truthfully, learning eye anatomy is not a sexy thing. But it is a critical piece. And we've got Christina who says she's just getting back into the field. That is wonderful. So as we look at this, I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce myself right off the top so you can understand why I'm presenting this the way I'm presenting it and why I teach the way I do. I got into holistic healing over 4 decades ago. I had some health problems as a very young adult that the doctors couldn't seem to put their fingers on. They kept running tests and more tests and more tests, and they never said, well, we've ruled this out, we've narrowed it down to this, and I got frustrated and I walked away from that. I'm not saying that all doctors are bad or that all medicine is bad. I'm just saying at that point in time, it wasn't meeting my needs. That was about the time I met the man who I've been married to for 4 decades. And he was into holistic stuff. He was into better nutrition. He knew a bit about iridology. He knew some about herbology. He knew a bit of reflexology. He knew all these little bits of things. And I just loved what we would discuss and what he was teaching me, because in truth, I actually was the black sheep of my family. I was the forerunner on this. My parents were very medical model. My brothers are very medical model. And it was really bizarre as a teenager that I wanted to, back then, wheat was good for you, but whole wheat was good for you, not white flour. So I was grinding whole wheat into flour and making bread by hand, for instance. As a teenager, I knew this was better for us than the white bread my parents were buying at the grocery store. So my interest in holistic healing started way before I met my husband, well, 3 or 4 years before I met my husband. And when I met him, he was the stepping stone that helped me to launch forward. I have been a holistic health practitioner since 1981-ish. And in those years, I've achieved several credentials. We'll talk about those in a minute. I've also written many books. They were self-published, self-distributed, things like Pregnancy Naturally, the Herbal Birth Kit Handbook, Healthy Kids Naturally, The Essential Guide to Nature's Sunshine Products, Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and Level 2. And my most recent book, The Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Textbook, which is available to students who are in my Dynamic Iridology course. I've also created and taught many courses, including Herbology Level 1, which we started teaching about 35 years ago, back before herb classes were really available, right? And this was designed to teach people how to use commercially available and prepared herbs. I wasn't teaching them how to harvest or how to dry them or turn them into tinctures or salves or lotions or anything like that. I was just simply saying, Rose hips, you can buy rose hips in capsules at the health food store, of which there were 2 in our city at the time. And this is why you would consider using them. These are the kinds of problems that rose hips could be helpful for. This is the nutritional value of rose hips. That course was so successful that those students from that 20-hour course asked for more. So we came up with a course to teach them about herbal combinations, how to look at a commercially prepared herbal combination, understand the ingredients and a little bit about how they would work together. Because what I had learned was that just because the front of the bottle says this preparation is good for problems X, Y, Z, doesn't mean that's all it's good for. When I taught them how to understand ingredients, they could see that this one formula that's being sold as an eye wash is also a liver cleanse. It's also good for heavy menstrual periods. And it opened up their eyes to the idea and the understanding that when we combine herbs, we get a very different effect than when we use single herbs. So that was another course that I developed, was Herbology Level 2, Biokinesiology and Color Therapies Level 1 and Level 2. So teaching muscle testing, teaching how to use color as a therapy on meridians. And for a while, I was a certified prenatal educator through the ICEA, and I loved designing and teaching antenatal classes. I've also designed and taught, and obviously I'm still teaching, the dynamic iridology assessment system. We'll talk more about this course, just a little bit more about it as we go. So stay with me through today because we've got some great information for you, and a little bit more about me just before we get too far. I am also a member of the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals and the Canadian Association of Natural Nutritional Practitioners. Now, both of these associations have standards where you have to have a certain level of training from very specific schools in order to even apply to be members of these associations. The Alberta Herbalist Association is much the same. As a professional member, I had to prove that I had certain training and X years of experience before they would approve me as a professional member. Now, the fact of the matter is that everything that I know, I love to teach. I am a teacher at heart. Even in my one-on-one consultation work with my clients, I am a teacher at heart. And that is why I do these webinars. And it's so good to have you joining me on the various platforms where you are today. Thank you for being with me and for prioritizing this 45 minutes or so to learn a little bit more about iridology. The information that I'm sharing with you today is a small snippet of information directly out of the course Dynamic Iridology Assessment System. This course, the full-on course, is the only live, online, fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. As a matter of fact, when we include iridology properly in an actual client session, we enhance client care, which is very, very exciting. And I love teaching this because it helps practitioners stop working overtime to create client programs. So many practitioners see the client, then go off for 2 or 3 or 4 hours to create a program. Then they bring it back to their client in a future appointment, but they're not getting paid for those hours. And so the purpose of incorporating iridology is to increase and improve client care, but also to help you as a practitioner stop putting in unpaid hours, unpaid overtime. Because if it takes you 2 or 3 or 4 hours to create a program, you're giving your client more information than they can actually use. They're not ready for all of that. So by using iridology, I will teach you also how to actually stop overwhelming your clients, how to create programs that your clients can stick with that will take them up one notch in their health. When we do that and the client has success in moving up one notch and moving up one more notch and one more notch, we improve their success, we improve their compliance, and we also create trust with them, which turns them into long-term repeat clients. So we get good client retention. How does that sound? Does that sound like something that you might want in your business? So the goal of the dynamic iridology system is to teach you constitutional iridology and how to use it confidently. That's important, so that you can easily integrate what you already know about nutrition or herbology or aromatherapy or whatever you do to help you confidently create doable client programs in your paid client sessions. Sound good? If that sounds good, give me a thumbs up somewhere, whichever platform you're on, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that that sounds good. Now, if you are a holistic health professional and you are ready to start learning iridology, or perhaps you know iridology, but you want to update your skills and you want to see if the dynamic iridology assessment system is a good fit for you, I invite you to book a phone call. Let's have a chat. We could do Zoom or phone, whatever works for you. Let's book a call and let's have a conversation to see if it is the right fit for you. Is this the right time and is it the right space? I'm going to post that link in the chat box for the webinar. If you're joining me on Instagram or on Facebook, and if you would like to actually receive that as a clickable link, just send me a DM and I will make sure to DM that back to you so you get the link. And I would love to hear from you. Excellent, excellent. It's so good to have all of you with me today. Now, are you ready to learn some iridology? Are you? If you are ready, give me a big yes in the comments. Let me know that you are ready to rock this. All right. Yeah, we've got some good yeses in the webinar group. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right, so here is what we need to know. Well, the very first thing is iridology photos are taken close up, right? You can see from here that these photos are like, they're taken with a camera that sits right here on the face. So we may not see that inner canthus. We might not be able to see, you know, anything else, any other facial features that tell us whether this is a right eye or a left eye. Now, as we're going through this, if you have questions about the thing I'm talking about, feel free to post them and I will do my very best to answer those for you. I have all my chat boxes open here. Okay, and so we need to know how to identify whether this is a left eye or a right eye. Here is your first interesting fact. Share this at dinner time tonight because people will go, whoa, I didn't know that. The pupil is not in the center of the iris. Look closely and you'll notice that one side of the iris is narrower than the other side. So the pupil is off center. The narrow side of the iris names the eye. So if the narrow side is to the right of the pupil, it is a right eye. If it is to the left of the pupil, it is a left eye. All right. This is important because when we look at an iridology map, we will see that the right eye, and we're not going to look at a map today, but you've probably seen them. The right eye reflects the right half of the body. The left eye reflects the left half of the body. And we have different organs on the right side as compared to the left side, right? And so we need to be very sure that we are looking, which eye we are looking at. Is it a right eye or is it a left eye? Very, very important. All right. And I just noticed the other day, I've got two of my boys love to adopt rescue puppies. And so one of my sons just adopted a rescue puppy about 5 months ago. And this little puppy that at 8 weeks was the cutest little ball of fur is now pretty darn big. My goodness, we're thinking of getting a saddle for him and to let the other grandkids ride. No, I'm just kidding. But we got photos of this puppy. His name is Chewbacca from Star Wars, of course. And what I noticed, and I've never looked at puppy eyes or dog eyes really close, but their pupils are off center as well, just the way human pupils are, which I found very fascinating. Now, we're not going to get into animal iridology, but I thought that was really interesting. So again, the narrow side of the iris names the eye. Okay, is that news for you? If that is something you did not know before, I would love you to put the word news in the chat box. And Glenda, thank you for joining us on Facebook. So good to see you. Welcome and she's from Alabama. That is so cool. All righty, let's look at an eyeball. When we look at an eyeball, and this is obviously a drawing, not a real eyeball, because I don't want anyone to get squeamish here. When we are looking at an eye, there are a lot of parts to the eye, some of which are important to this practice of iridology, and some of them are not. And Valerie is saying that was news to her, that the pupil was off center. Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate that. So as we look at this eyeball, let's look at relevant parts of the eye. We're going to do sort of general anatomy, and then we're going to get into more specifics as it relates to iridology. So the eyeball is actually the neural receptor or the nerve ending for the optic nerve. It is the largest nerve ending that you have. And it has lots of other nerve endings in it. As you remember, nerves sorry, I just got distracted there. There we go. My apologies. Nerves only transmit one kind of information, right? Each nerve can only transmit one kind. So if you've got a cold receptor, it only transmits cold. If you touch something hot, that cold receptor is not going to be active. And so as we look at the eye and we have the optic nerve, that's transmitting one kind of information to the brain as far as what you're seeing, but the eye does contain many other nerves for other purposes. The eyeball has two fluid-filled chambers. We have first the posterior chamber, which is this back section of the eyeball. And this is filled with vitreous. That's the fluid that helps it to stay inflated. Then we have a dividing layer right here, which is the iris and the lens. And in front of that, we have the anterior chamber that is filled with aqueous. Okay, and so this dividing layer, of course, is where we're going to spend most of our time. The pupil, which is right here, you see how the iris comes up and there's a hole in the middle. So the iris is like a donut that has a hole in the middle. That hole in the middle is the pupil. So this is actually an opening. It's the aperture. If you're familiar with cameras, it's the very same thing. It's the aperture in the camera that allows the image into the camera, to the film, or to the memory card, whatever you're shooting there. This whole area, again, is the iris, and it is separating the back from the front. We are going to, then we also want to do the outside layer here. The outside layer is the sclera. This is the white of the eye, and notice that it comes and it actually wraps around the optic nerve. Now the sclera is really tough, and it also helps the eyeball to hold shape. It's also a bit of a protective layer, but it is white. At the very front of the eyeball, this becomes clear, because if it was white, we wouldn't be able to see. It would be blocking light from entering the pupil and shining onto the retina. So at the very front, the cornea becomes clear. It is here, or sorry, the sclera becomes clear. It is known as the cornea here at the front of the eye. The optic nerve actually exits the back of the eyeball, and it splits into two pathways. Each eye has the nerve that splits. One part of the nerve goes straight back, and the other part literally crosses over. So there's a place in the brain where these cross over like that, and it's called decussing, and this is known as the optic chiasm. This piece, where they cross over, is what gives us the ability to see in 3 dimensions. If the nerves only went straight back, we could at best see in 2 dimensions. So we need this optic chiasm. We need these nerves to decuss, to cross over, so that we can have 3D vision. If you've ever known, and we need both eyes doing that. If you've ever known anyone who's completely blind in one eye, you will know that their depth perception, their 3D is very, very poor. They learn to adapt, and they learn what their depth perception is and how it works for them, but they don't have true 3D. We're going to take, I'm just going to flip back here for just a moment. Okay, so we've got, now I'm going to stay right here actually. This is that same image flipped on its side. Now I've done this for a specific reason because now we're going to look at the iris, but we want to look specifically at this piece of the iris. Remember, the iris is a donut. It's a donut shape. And in this image, we put the donut on its side and we've cut it in half. And we are looking at that cut side of the donut. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Hopefully it does. All right, so let's look at that cut side. This just one side of the cut end here. This is a schematic drawing of what one side of the iris looks like. So this is the pupil right here. This is the iris, and the sclera would be over here. Okay, so the first thing we need to be aware of is this layer. This is the layer that faces out to the world. This is the layer that we see as either blue or hazel or brown. This is called the anterior border layer. The cornea actually sits in front of this. So we've got the cornea, then we've got the aqueous, then we have the iris with the anterior border layer being front facing. This is the layer that holds the pigment. So if you have blue eyes, there's very little pigment in here. If you have brown eyes, there's a lot of pigment. If you've got eyes that are a mix of colors, we've got other pigments sitting in here. This is again, the difference between a blue eye and a brown eye is actually the pigment density. Again, the blue eye has very little pigment. The brown eye has much more. So when we talk about pigment colors, a blue eye is lymphatic, a brown eye is hematogenic, and what's in between is a biliary. And so the lymphatic iris has very sparse pigment, and the hematogenic has very dense pigment. Then we have the stroma. That is this layer in here. All of this, kind of the filling. Someone once described this as being like an apple pie. We've got the top crust, we've got the bottom crust, and then we've got the filling. So the filling in the iris is called the stroma. This is made up of trabeculae, which are individual fibers that radiate outward. It is also made up of blood vessels, and we've got nerves as well in here, and we've got muscles. We've got two specific muscles in the iris itself. We have also the posterior membrane, or the posterior epithelium. Sorry, we'll do the posterior membrane first, which is also known as the dilator muscle. So this little bit of tissue right in here. This is made up of muscle fibers that radiate outward from the eye. And we're going to look at a schematic of this specifically in just a few minutes. But this muscle is what is responsible for opening up the pupil when there's not enough light. Okay. Then we have the posterior epithelium. This is really fascinating because this is two layers, count them, 1, 2, of very dark, either dark brown or black cells on the back side of the iris. So this is pointing into the posterior chamber that is filled with vitreous. Notice how these cells, however, wrap around that inner edge next to the pupil. These cells are extremely light sensitive, and they are a part of what tell the different muscles what to do. All right, are we good so far? If we're good so far, give me a good in the comments box. And I'm being asked on Instagram, can we get the documents of this lecture? If you have registered for the webinar, you will receive a replay. You will not receive any print documents, but you will receive a replay of the webinar. And if you're on Instagram, this will be posted to IGTV as well, so you can view it there again. And if you're in my Facebook group, of course, the replay will be there as well. All right, so when we look at an eye, we need to be aware again that the iris itself has layers. It's not just one layer of fiber, it's many layers. And when we are aware that we've got layers, and Theodora is saying she's doing good with this, that's great. And so is Health by Solutions. Thank you for that feedback. And Glenda says good, I think. Glenda, if this is your first foray into this, which it looks like it might be, yeah, we're going through this pretty quick, much faster than I will in the class. Or rather in the course itself. All right, so we've got this thickness. Now, when we're looking at an eye, can you see that there are some areas that are a little darker than others, where we've got some shading happening, whether it's inside a closed shape, whether it's inside an open shape? Do you see that we've got some different shading in the eye? When we see that shading, what we need to be aware of is we are looking at areas where the fibers are separated, and we're looking down into the layers of the fibers. So when we see fibers that are bright white or that are very thick, like this one right here, these are sitting high on the surface of the eye. We're not going to change that position. That's genetically how it was placed. It's not going to move from that position. When we see areas where there's a bit of shading, we've got fibers that have separated, so we're looking down a little bit. So we've got a little bit, it's harder for the light to reach down there, so it's going to look a bit darker. The darker it looks, the deeper we're looking into the iris. Okay, now it's important to remember as we look at this that we also have these things, which we call contraction furrows. We're not going to get loads into contraction furrows today, but what we are going to suggest with these is that no, we're not going to suggest, we're going to teach. These are genetically programmed. And when they look darker, it is usually because the pupil is large. All righty. So we're not going to get deep into that. That's an entire 2-hour lesson on its own. Remember that we have the cornea in front of things. All right, so you see over here, we've got a contraction furrow, which is not very deep in this diagram. It's going to be a little shading. The deeper that contraction furrow, the more shaded it's going to be. The more shaded we have an area that is not a contraction furrow, the deeper we're looking into the eye. All right. Again, remember, this is a highlights tour. We're not taking the time to really dive into these topics as deeply as we do in the course. We mentioned there are some specific muscles. We have a constrictor or a sphincter muscle and a dilator muscle. And then we have the sclera. So the sphincter muscle goes around and around and around. So it's muscles that are going like this around the pupil. When light is bright, the stimulation on the eye makes this muscle ratchet together and come together like this, which means that it's closing down the pupil to let less light in. But there's no mechanism to release this. If you understand muscle structure, muscles contract, but they need to be basically pulled apart. They can ratchet together, but they cannot unratchet on their own. They need to be released. And so that's why we have them, the dilator muscles. So notice that these muscles anchor together right here. And the dilator muscle anchors into the sclera. So this edge is never going to move. When these muscles, which radiate outwards, contract, they're going to do this. Right? They're going to come in, ratchet together like this. And what that's going to do, because it's anchored here, it's going to pull on this edge of the sphincter muscle. It's going to pull that edge outwards, which is going to pull the muscle, the sphincter muscle apart to open up the pupil. Then the exact opposite happens when the light is very bright. that sphincter muscle is going to ratchet together, and it is going to pull on this edge right here, which is then going to stretch the dilator muscle fibers apart and lengthen that muscle area out. This is really important information because this totally affects how contraction furrows show up in the eye. And again, contraction furrows are an entirely separate topic. The iris is estimated to have some 28,000 nerve endings. We don't actually know what they all do yet. We're still doing research on that. So when we are looking at an eye, sometimes we can actually see the constrictor muscle. And when we see constrictor muscle, we know that there is a layer of fiber missing, or that top layer of fiber is a little bit sparse. The constrictor muscle, if we start here at the pupil and come out, can you see, if you look carefully, that there's a bit of an edge right here going all the way around? That edge where we see the texture change from here to here. On my computer, I can see a slight color variation from what's here to what's here. This area is the sphincter muscle. Okay, this is the sphincter muscle. And so this is the muscle that is then pulling on the rest of everything to constrict. The rest of everything is the dilator muscle that when it is contracting, it stretches out this constrictor muscle and opens up the pupil. Is this making sense? If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments. Yes, health wise, thank you. Yeah, it is difficult to get good images when I'm shooting this from my camera. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit better for you health wise. Thank you for letting me know there was an issue with that. The picture will now, for my Instagram people, be a little wobblier because I'm holding my camera with my hand. So let's also then look at blood flow in the iris. When we look at blood flow in the iris, we have both arterial flow and venous flow. And so, and HealthWise is saying this makes sense. Awesome. That is fabulous. And so is Elizabeth. Wonderful, wonderful. And Dunav is saying it makes sense too. This is very good. You know that with arterial flow, it's blood flowing away from the heart. With venous flow, it's blood flowing back to the heart, correct? And so when we look at the eye, the arterial flow starts at the limbus, or the outer edge, comes towards the collarette. That's arterial. The venous flow is from the collarette back out to the limbus. When we're looking inside the collarette, we're talking about blood flow from the inner limbus, or the pupillary ruff, to the collarette is arterial, and from the collarette back to the pupillary ruff is venous. So whenever we've got blood moving from an edge, whether it's the outer edge of the iris or the inner edge, moving from that towards the collarette, that will always be arterial. Moving from the collarette back out to the edge, and it doesn't matter whether it's the outer edge or the inner edge, that will always be venous. All right. Blood vessels within the eye are coated with collagen. And it's the collagen that makes the blood vessels appear white in the lymphatic eye. Now, it doesn't matter what color the eyes are, all of these capillaries are coated with collagen. It's just the sparseness of the pigment in a lymphatic eye allows us to see the white collagen layer on there. All righty. It's really important for us to remember too, as we're studying this, to keep in our minds always that the iris, and studying the iris, looking at the fiber structure, the base color, the surface pigments. We are looking at inherited potentials. We are not looking at things that are going to be changed by diet. Like you can't do a cleanse and clean this up out of the eye. You're not going to do a cleanse and move fiber structure around. It doesn't happen. So we need to also remember that as we're looking at this, we are looking at genetic inheritance. Now, you might have inherited a predisposition for something, but you might be doing the right things with your health that are minimizing your risk of developing whatever that condition was. And so as we remember that, we never ever diagnose from the eye. We can't look at an eye and say, you have this disease, because we can't tell from the eye whether they do or not. We can tell if there is a weak link in their system, but we don't know if it's manifesting unless we have a conversation with the client. Let's do some case studies. That sound like fun? You want to do some case studies? If you do, give me cases in the comments box. Cases, right on. Okay. Thanks for playing with me in my sandbox here, Christina and Marissa. I really appreciate that. So as we look at this person, this is a female client, and health-wise, thank you so much. Female client, mid-30s with fertility issues. She's had one successful pregnancy about 15 years ago, wants to get pregnant again, but having problems. They've had a miscarriage, and it's not looking great. So when we look at her eyes, can you see the layers? Can you see that when we look in here, for instance, we can see other fibers back in behind? We are looking down into layers. Okay, so that's one thing. When we look at an eye like this, we're looking for shading. We're looking for, are there different shapes in the eye? You know, where we start off is with the color. So when we see we've got a brown, a true brown eye, there's no other colors except for maybe gold in an eye like this. That's what we call a hematogenic eye. We know we're looking at an increased risk of liver imbalances. Now, when you understand liver, you also understand that liver has an awful lot to do with hormone balance, right? And when we understand that, we know we're going to be doing a lot of liver work with this person. You'll notice that we can see the collarette coming around here, which is going to teach us about the nervous system, about digestion and assimilation. And so one of the things that I want to point out here is that in an eye that is dark brown like this, there is a higher risk, in my experience, of the MTHFR defect. And we aren't going to dive into MTHFR today. You might know what that is already. But when a woman has the MTHFR defect, it usually means it's going to create some challenges for conception and carrying a pregnancy. Again, the eye color is suggesting an inherent predisposition towards liver imbalances. And we also have in here some contraction furrows. Don't know if you'll see these clearly on Instagram. Oh, yes, you can. You see, we've got these little bits of wrinkles coming around the edges of the eye here. We've got some more down here as well. These are contraction furrows, and they suggest that she may burn through her B vitamins too quickly. But if she's MTHFR defect, then we've got some real issues with B vitamins. We've got a slight cloudiness. I'm going to move over to an expanded version of her eye. Right here, we've got this slight cloudiness, which also suggests that there may be an inherent predisposition towards some liver enzyme imbalance, particularly as it relates to how she processes her carbohydrates. So as I saw that, I asked her if she'd had her cholesterol checked lately. And I also asked her, does she crave carbs? And she said, absolutely, she craves carbs. She'd been cleaning that up over the last little while. That was great. And so that alone, that she craves carbs, we found out that she'd been gaining weight. And since she started cleaning up the carbs, she started to lose the weight again, which is good. We found out that her menstrual cycles were very irregular, tending to be very on the long side, more than 45 days apart. And so all of that suggested that she probably had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I cannot diagnose. I'm not a medical doctor. So I asked her if anyone else, if she'd had any diagnoses from the doctors that might suggest polycystic ovarian syndrome. She said, yeah, that's what they called it. Well, if you know PCOS, and this is why it's so important to know your anatomy and physiology when you do iridology. When you know PCOS, you also know that these women tend to be type 2 diabetic or insulin resistant, right? Which is going to throw back to diet, pancreas, liver, and even some adrenal kind of stuff in there. Now, because this client was interested in focusing on fertility, I wasn't going to, and I never did spend a lot of time focusing on things that would have nothing to do with her concerns, right? That would get us bogged down and it wouldn't get her moving along. So we focused on anything in her eyes that could tie into the fertility question. So liver, ovaries, blood lipids, blood sugars, anything to do with those kinds of things. And what we were able to do by limiting the markers we looked at, limiting how much we checked in the eyes, especially what I checked and shared with her, I avoided overwhelming her and was able to create a program for her that she could actually implement. She had a good start on the dietary corrections, and we helped her finish that up and get it fully into place. And she actually did conceive just a few months after we started working, which was very, very happy. All right, so that's the case study that we have time for today. So if you would like to learn more about iridology, especially if you are a holistic health practitioner, I will invite you again to shoot me a DM with your contact information, if you would please, or shoot me a DM, and I will send you back that link so that you can book a call and we can talk about whether the dynamic iridology assessment system is for you. This is a 40-hour live instruction. We do it in 22-hour-long live classes online course, and it is designed to teach you iridology and to teach you how to use it in your practice, to teach you how to create programs for your clients, to teach you how to not overwhelm your clients with the information you see. Because truthfully, in that eye we looked at, there was a lot more information than what I shared with her. None of it was critical to the moment, so there was no sense in bogging down with that, right? And so if you want to learn how to do iridology, if you want long-term support during the course and even after the course is done, helping you to implement iridology into your holistic health coaching practice, then I encourage you to reach out to me and to set up a call. Let's talk about it. And again, I'm just going to post this URL in the chat box for those who are with me on the webinar. And let's see if this is a good fit for you right now. And if it's not, that's great. If it is, that's great too. So any questions on anything we talked about for eye anatomy? I didn't see any come in, and I watched things pretty closely. I really appreciated the feedback and the interaction. It just makes it so much easier to teach when I know that people are logged on or staying awake with me. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I do not believe I'm seeing any questions come in. Those of you who have registered for the webinar will receive the replay link probably within 24 hours. Those of you who are on Facebook can watch this anytime you want, and on Instagram it will be posted to that. So HealthWise is asking, how do we book a call? You go to this URL, HealthWise, https://tinyurl.com/iridology-call. And that is what will allow you to book a call to talk about the course and see if this is the right fit for you. I look forward to speaking with you soon, and I hope you have a fabulous day. Bye for now.